We do Pride Week in March because in June we're not all together. So I think that it is very much this time in the semester to really be celebrating.
For those of us who work for Simon's Rock, who are part of the LGBTQ community, to be sort of visible is actually really important to the students.
Often our students may not know many or any LGBTQ adults. It's always important to remember that there may be a student who seems very comfortable in being themselves, which may very well be the case, but they might not have any role models older than themselves who are people that they actually know.
Last year I got a really touching note from a graduating senior thanking me for being a role model, and it's a student that I had interacted with, but I never really thought of myself as a role model, and for this particular student. And it was really important to that student, as it turned out, that there was somebody that they could sort of not look up to in a kind of hierarchical way, but that they could just sort of see somebody living their life and being sort of normal.
I was never one of those kids who was in. Always different, always other, always something else. To Simon's Rock, I was surrounded by people who were kind of in that same boat, looking around and seeing so many other queer people, other people on the spectrum, other people who identified in similar not straight kind of ways was normalizing in a way I had never seen before. When you're 16, 17, 18, that's when you're really kind of figuring out your way in the world. And to be able to do that as a queer youth in a completely supportive atmosphere is groundbreaking. We all know Simon's Rock is not just about the education in the classroom. It's about the lived experience outside of the classroom, how to live in community, how to exist in the world. And I think navigating that as a queer youth is particularly key. I think other educational institutions could really kind of look at some of what we're doing and adopt some of that into their own models.
Nowadays, in the year 2021, we have this vocabulary about living your authentic self. And I think if I reflect on that vocabulary today, going back to 1989, I think that's really what the college meant to me, is that living openly and freely and honestly and authentically, there's a level of optimism and kind of, regardless of who you were, Simon's Rock affords you an opportunity of who you want to be and who you want to become. And so I think that's a very powerful message.
The idea was to give these very, very young students the clues, the events, the very, very important events in queer history, not only in what is queer and what is understood as queer in the United States or in Europe, but all the different forms of being queer around the world. We're also talking about the intersections between being black and being queer, being brown and being queer, being from any other place and being queer. They can reconstruct that history, and that is basically some sort of empowerment.
I was really raised in the gay community. I was pretty alienated in high school. I went from being super involved in lots of things to being very checked out, very closeted, honestly, about my family. My life flipped. Immediately from sort of getting onto campus, I felt lighter. I was encouraged to, was supported to spend time and going to Albany and sometimes New York City for protests and other direct actions, and to do AIDS education on campus. It was a coming out. I really got to come out at Simon's Rock.
Simon's Rock is very much a place in which you are allowed to be exactly who you are and grow into who you want to be. I'm transgender, non-binary. If it wasn't for Simon Jock and having the community that allowed me to explore my sexuality, my gender expression, I wouldn't be the person I am today. And I think that's so important for students to realize that it's normal to be queer. It is normal to have pride in oneself and showcase that to the world. It is the most amazing feeling to be seen, be heard, be valued.
Rock was the place where I realized that I was different than who I thought I was, and as a place that really, where that was totally fine, right, and where the community was supportive of that journey, where I could go in as someone who perceived myself as heterosexual and probably wanted to be a math major, and come out as someone who saw myself as gay and as a psychology major, who took dance classes or did all sorts of things that I would not have expected from myself. Simon's Rock changed my life, and I think that's true for so many.
I came here first as just a kind of member of the community before I started working here. People have always treated me with open arms, even when I didn't work here and they only knew me as Lisa Donahue's wife. I feel like I mostly just get to exist as my whole self. Simon's Rock supports LGBTQ students by allowing them to just be. I think what's so cool about Simon's Rock is that all sorts of identities, but especially queer identities, are not that unique here. People just accept it, and there are lots of exciting things about a person to understand. One of them might be their sexuality or gender identity, and it, I think, allows students to just exist and be themselves.
I think Simon's Rock supported my journey as a gay man because it asked me to ask deep, serious questions of myself about who am I? Who are you? That really began for me in earnest at Simon's Rock. Simon's Rock influenced my art and what I write as a novelist by showing me that my experience matters and is worth talking about and is worth being heard. The world can learn so much from placing its trust and faith in young people the way that Simon's Rock does. The place really saved my life.
Pride Week at Simon's Rock is about celebration.
I am so incredibly elated that there is a Pride Week.
And the more we come out and try to live authentically, the better place the world is.
I hope that as we experience Pride Week, we both get to grow in our thoughts and our ideas and have some moments of challenge and growth, but also just have some moments that are really joyful, so we've got pride and joy going on during our
Okay, good evening. And happy Pride. Very excited to have you here in the audience, live here in the McConnell Theater, as well as those watching us in the Zoomosphere. So great to have you here with us. We are excited to be able to have this Pride Week lecture. We are here in person. We are still slightly masked, but in fabulous rainbow ways. And I couldn't be more excited to be introducing our speaker. I have had the great pleasure of knowing Ann Thalheimer for, wow, like 20 years, because we were both like 4. And many in the Simon's Rock community have known Ann in a variety of capacities. First as a student, Ann came here in 1991 and was here from 91 to 95, during which time she earned her Bachelor of Arts in Literary Studies. That did propel her into her next fields of work, which was to continue on for a master's and Ph.D. in English literature from the University of Delaware. Then Ann and I kind of intersect because I came here first time fully on campus in 2002 as a new faculty in Chinese and Asian Studies, and Anne was a new residence director in Delaware. So for those of you who kind of can't imagine a time before Valerie lived on that first floor apartment in Delaware, and you're like, wasn't she been here since forever? In fact, no, someone was there before, and that was Anne Thalheimer. And she can be more than capable of filling any of our shoes. She is an amazing person. I also was fortunate that she did actually take one of my classes during that time, which was an amazing group of students when I think back on that class. So that was really fantastic. And I think what is so amazing about Anne is the way that she really brings activism and academics and all of these different ways of being into one in the way that just seems so natural. It's not natural for everyone, so I'm hoping she'll help us kind of figure out how we do that. But this really influences all of the things that she does. She's an artist and educator, and many aspects of all of those words, looking at visual culture, autobio comics, independent publishing. Her work, which is both academic work and graphic work, has appeared in numerous collections, including the MLA's Teaching the Graphic Novel. She's a long-term reviewer for Xerography Debt and a former contributor to both Fleen and PopMatters. She has many fun facts. So I kind of feel like what facts about Anne aren't fun, but one of my favorites is that she's been a roller derby referee for over 10 years. So should the Q&A get a little wild, she can also keep that under control. And this is definitely going to be a participatory experience. So those in here in the room, get ready. Those who are watching from afar, we really encourage you to do that because she really means participatory in the largest sense of that in the world, right? So I'm really very excited to be able to welcome back to Simon's Rock the amazing Anne Thalheimer.
It was incredible. Awesome. Thank you. Excellent. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for coming. Happy Pride. So when I was asked to do this talk, I was really excited at first. And then my second thought was, what am I going to talk about for half an hour? I have some thoughts. All right. So in our discussions, in thinking about what to set up for this talk, and it is going to be participatory. We'll get into that a little bit later. It's going to be broken into roughly three parts: self, community, and communities. And it was actually kind of neat. I was coming back in. I'd forgotten that I had done this video for the Pride video, and I was talking about community. I'm like, oh, that's right on point. So you'll also see quotes underneath on each of these. So I think this will be fun, and we'll get into it. All right, so I work at a museum most of the time and I have a couple of other gigs here and there. I love dinosaurs and do a lot of different educational work. I often introduce myself as an artist and an educator, usually in that order, in part because I don't feel like they're necessarily separate things, and a lot of the work I have done has to do with visual culture. I did get a Ph.D. in lesbian comics at the University of Delaware. I know. To my knowledge, it is still the only dissertation written on lesbian comics, so I carved out a real specific niche. And that's a lot of my academic work. But my work outside of my academic work takes a lot of different forms, including dinosaurs. And I think about this a lot too, because I also do comic books, right? And a lot of independent publishing and zines and Xerox machines and this kind of stuff. But I also later in life got into, believe it or not, weightlifting, like weight training. So literally lifting heavy things. So this is the new book. And I was not always very good at lifting things. I showed up, kind of scruffy on my first day. And I really do love the ACLU. We're going to talk about the ACLU a little bit later on as well. And I think about this also, like, as an artist, as an educator, I am sort of the sum total of all the things that came before me, right? All the people I learned from my time in Simon's Rock, and this kind of continuum of awesome community. thinking about some of the other rockers who have done amazing things. The two that come immediately to mind, Roman Mars, who did a podcast called 99% Invisible, but also did this bomb TED Talk about why city flags are the worst designed things you've ever seen. So if you haven't watched that, watch it. You've seen it? It's so good. We're going to talk about city flags later on too, because my city is about to celebrate its 150th anniversary, and I want nothing more for them to change the flag because it's real bad. You'll see it in a couple slides. But I also think about Justin Diebler, who gave the talk last year, and his amazing work, and thinking about who I am in relation to all these other amazing people and my peers and folks I've learned from over the years. So all of that is kind of kicking around my brain. But also, I'm gonna leave this up for a second because this is funny, right? I think about visual stuff all the time. When I was a kid, I have a distinct memory when I was maybe like 5 or 6. It was summertime. I grew up in Massachusetts, outside of Boston. It was summertime, and my mom, my 2 brothers, and I, we were on a bus going somewhere, and it was hot, and I was wearing a wig. And the reason I was in a wig was because I snuck behind the couch the week before and cut off my hair, which is sort of the precursor for what I ended up doing at Simon's Rock anyway. So my mom was very upset and was concerned that people would mistake me for a boy. So we got a wig. It was summer. It was hot. The wig was itchy. So I whipped it off of my head and threw it into the rack above, much to the shock and horror of the woman who was not related to us sitting in the seat behind me. There was a little scream. It was pretty good. Later on, a friend of mine sent me this. This is my 6th grade class picture from about 1986. And I looked at it and I was like, okay, 80s, full effect, I see it. Where am I in this? And it took me a minute because I was like, I don't know where I am in this. I'll give you a hint. Ready? Oh no. Haha. Note the matching vest and tie. And clearly I'm like this, I'm in my Joan Jett phase, I guess. Clearly the matching thing has not abated, you know? The fangs and the glasses both glow in the dark. This is the promo I picture I use for everything, because folks are like, oh, we need a professional headshot. And I'm like, have you met me? This is what you get. It's also the promo picture I use for my fancy summer teaching at a very prestigious Ivy League institution. And I can't believe I get away with this. But also I work at a science museum, right? I get to do stuff like this. And this is one of the things that has been most important to me as an adult in finding my way in the world and figuring out what I'm gonna do, being able to live as my authentic self in all forms, right? Tattooed, weirdo, out there, interesting human, queer identified, all these other things that are all components of who I am always get to come into play in everything that I do. And I appreciate that, but I learned it here, right? Paint me like one of your French dinosaurs. I know, we have this footprint at the museums. I love this. And I have a very nice coworker who kind of goes along with all the weird stuff. We do a TV program from time to time. I get to be Dr. T, she's Mrs. C. This is our 2-story T-Rex. It's a pretty good gig. It's a good gig. So, thinking about all these things, moving into concepts of communities. And I really particularly love this quote from Harvey Milk, because we're going to start talking about politics and activism. And so if you help elect more gay people, that gives a green light to all who feel disenfranchised, a green light to move forward. And I think this is key. When we start thinking about community, community doesn't just build itself, right? You can get a group of people together. That doesn't mean you have community. You have to figure out some ways to build it. What does community look like? These are things to think about as we go through this, right? What does community look like? How do you build community? How do you position yourself within the community? And particularly like this one, what responsibilities do you have as a community member? Okay, back to Holyoke. So I live in Holyoke, which is about an hour or so away. It's kind of near Springfield, and it's a scruffy little city that runs like a small town. We have a lot of good things going on. All right, a lot of interesting stuff. But again, I kind of go back to Roman Mars's idea about if you have to put the name of your city on your flag, your design has failed. All right, so Holyoke has a lot going for it. We are getting a lot of industry coming in. We also have a high percentage of Spanish speakers, right? So I can go an entire day in my city without hearing English, which is amazing, and I appreciate and love. We have a lot of problems. We still struggle with poverty. We struggle with addiction. People are starting to come in and take some of the properties. So we're dealing with a lot of gentrification and other issues. We have a robust tenants union, lots of stuff going on. And I really like living there. I chose to move there as an adult, good stuff happening. Sometimes we get it wrong, but sometimes we get it really right. And here's an example. You may or may not know about Alex Morse. Alex Morse was elected mayor of Holyoke in 2011, becoming the youngest openly gay mayor of an American city. All right, which is kind of amazing. We re-elected him twice. He is now the town manager of P-Town, which is awesome. And there's a lot more to his story, all right? There's a lot more going on. I'm kind of giving you the context for the story I'm about to tell you, but what you need to know from this, Alex Morse, young, out, gay, grew up in Holyoke, mayor. This is, I still don't have the heart to take him out on my phone because like Alex DBA mayor just cracks me up. But I also run for office, and I think it's really important for people to get involved in politics at whatever level, right? So I run for office every opportunity I get. And I run for office like this, right? Because again, your authentic self. Now, if you have never thought about running for office, I want to encourage you to think about running for office. They say that sometimes people have to be asked like 7 times before they start thinking about running for office. Consider this your first. There may be a second later on. So, I run for office pretty regularly, and I kind of dig it. It gives me a chance to talk to people, and it gives me a chance to get involved with city government. I think civic responsibility is super, super important, right? So backing up a little bit, part of why civic engagement is super important is stuff like this, right? When we think about legislation, and we think about changes to legislation, we often think about them at sort of big tier levels, right? State level legislation and federal level legislation, right? Tennessee bans drag. Supreme Court, I mean, pick whatever, there's so many, right? So we have these big picture things, but a lot of those things happen at the micro level, at the super local level. For example, when mouse was banned last year and it made national news, it was one school board, right? It was the McMinn County School Board in Tennessee, one school board. Right? Maya Kobabe's amazing book, Genderqueer, you keep hearing about it getting banned. It's been banned by 138 school districts in 32 states by the end of late 2022, at least according to PEN America. But remember, these are school boards. These are small local school boards, right? That's where this stuff starts. We're talking about city councils. We're talking about selectmen, boards of aldermen, school committees, and such. So, let's get nerdy for a second. I want to tell you the story about a particular thing that happened in Holyoke and why this is important and how we connect it to sort of bigger picture stuff. So, in December 2017, this guy, David Bartley, who I run against, I'm going to throw a little shade because I can, decided that he was going to create this sign ordinance in Holyoke. Now, part of the reason, allegedly, that he got this into his head was that he didn't like the new mayor. He wasn't a particular fan, which smacks to me of homophobia, given a lot of what he said in city council, right? And so decided that he was going to create this ordinance, the sign ordinance for the city of Holyoke, in which they're going to create this temporary sign ordinance, and it regulates what you can put, like where you can put a sign and when you can put it, right? The ordinance should regulate when the signs can be installed, the size as well as the deadline by which the signs must be removed. The ordinance could then impose a penalty on the property owner and or the vendor or candidate in whose favor the sign is for. The ordinance should also describe which city departments shall enforce this ordinance. So all of a sudden, this guy who doesn't like the mayor turns it into an issue and turns it into a lot of work for a lot of other departments. Not just, we're going to have this ordinance, but we're going to fine people, and this other department is going to have to deal with it. But because it's a local ordinance, folks were like, okay. Background, he says, my purpose in filling this order is not to punish vendors or political candidates, but to emphasize that campaigns by their nature are finite, all right? And any political sign should only be temporary themselves and not be permanently posted in lawns or on buildings. First Amendment calls this federally protected free speech, right? So, this order's intent is not to impose regulating the content of the vendor or the political candidate's speech, there's our First Amendment, but only to preserve aesthetic appeal and traffic safety. Any current political signs left over from past campaigns shall not be exempt from this ordinance. And that's where it comes out, right? That's where it's like, I don't like that this person has this large sign on a building, I'm gonna make an ordinance to make it go away. But this aesthetic appeal and this traffic safety, remember, this happened in 2017, December 2017, traffic safety from this guy is kind of rich, considering this had happened a couple of months before. Yep. So in December 2017, he introduces this ordinance. And this is how like a lot of local government works. A city councilor will bring an ordinance, something forward, and it gets sent to committee. Sometimes it dies in committee, sometimes it comes back to the full body. So here, goes to ordinance, stays there for like a year, and then it comes back. The ordinance committee approves the order, and they send it back to the full council to approve it. They unanimously approve it, at which point it adds in a little bit of extra language. Notably, temporary signs shall not be placed on or affixed to vehicles. Permanent signs affixed to vehicles are exempt from this section, but it doesn't go on to define what is temporary and what is permanent, like bumper stickers. No temporary signs shall be allowed in any district between the dates of December 1st and March 1st of each year in any location within the city. Now, in Massachusetts, you can have a special election at any time of the year. Somebody dies, somebody leaves office, special election. So this particular window of time is kind of arbitrary. Signs to be placed in any location between these dates for a duration of longer than 2 weeks shall be registered with the building department prior to placement. So now the building department has to approve it before you can put it in your lawn or in your the window of your apartment. Registrants will provide a location of placement, duration of placement, and the materials of which the sign is made. So all of a sudden, folks are like, wait, you want to legislate my lawn signs and my bumper stickers? What kind of nonsense is this? The mayor vetoes the order. He's like, this is unconstitutional and I'm not signing it. So then it goes back to city council, who override the mayor's veto 9-3, even though the chambers is packed with people saying, don't do this, this is unnecessary, also free speech. So they decide to pass it, and it's about to become law. This new ordinance is set to take effect, but we sued them. Called the ACLU and sued them. Which was fun because, again, being able to like be friends with the mayor, we were actually, a couple of us at drag bingo, bumped into the mayor and we were like, hey, Alex, this ordinance is bad. Do you mind if we sue the city? He's like, no, call the ACLU, here we go. So we did. So we actually got together with the ACLU in Massachusetts and sued the city, and we won. We got a temporary injunction to shut this law down, and then the following April, we got a permanent injunction. So they were never able to enforce this bogus lawn sign rule and bumper sticker rule. Now, this sounds like a lot of like very hyper local detail. Here's why it's important. This kind of hyper detail is the same thing that we're starting to see in these legislative bans that we're seeing at the state level and we're seeing at the national level, right? This is the Tennessee law, and I don't mean to pick on Tennessee. One of my dearest, closest friends is from Tennessee. I know there are Tennesseans in the audience, but this is what we're seeing a lot in the news. And so particularly, it's not just that they're banning drag, they're trying to reclassify it as adult cabaret performance. And the underpinnings of this are rooted in homophobia, right? That links to that "won't anyone think of the children" argument that we see so frequently when these come up, right? Grouped in with all this, male or female impersonators who provide entertainment that appeals to a prurient interest. Here's what that means. It's part of a phrase that showed up in obscenity law, in obscenity case law, right? We see the First Amendment here, of course, but introducing the term into the First Amendment legal vocabulary, the court, in this footnote in 1957, defined prurient interest as, quote, having a tendency to excite lustful thoughts. So if you are watching a drag queen read a children's story to children at a library and you are thinking lustful thoughts, the problem is not the drag queen. The problem is you. So, springboarding from that concept into the idea of communities, because we know this within communities. If you think back to all of the activism and all the things that happened post-Stonewall, and I kind of want to mention, like, Sylvia Rivera, when this happened, was 17 years old, right? If you think about all the things that happened after Stonewall, it wasn't that there was, like, suddenly, like, everybody came together and worked together. There were still a lot of factions, and there was a lot of fighting, and there was a lot of disagreement about how things should be done. So to think about the queer community as like one singular overarching thing loses some of those capacities and some of those individual things that make it so rich and so varied and so important. So when we think about community, we also need to think about communities. So where do we go from here, right? Part of the reason I wanted to get in on this talk, and part of the reason why you got those handouts, is for this next part. And so if you're at home, if you're watching from home, this is your opportunity to go get a pen and a postcard, or get on your email or whatever, because you need to participate too. So what do we do? What do we do to fight these things? What do we do to get involved, right? First things first, register to vote. If you are eligible to register to vote and you have not done so, do so. Your vote matters. It is crucial that you vote. And not just vote once in presidential elections, vote in your municipal elections, vote on those school board things. Go talk to folks. When they start making those hyper-local decisions about banning books, that's when you step in and say, no, this is unacceptable and we're not doing it, right? If you're not old enough to vote, see if your state allows you to pre-register. Many states will allow you to pre-register at 16. Super important. Get involved, support campaigns, learn the issues, contact elected officials. And this is in bold because we're going to do some of that in a minute. Run for office. This is your second ask. Really do it, right? Government's supposed to be for all of us. What's that saying? Like, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu, right? Run for office. Get organized. Work with and learn from current organizations. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Learn from those who have come before. Learn from those folks who are doing the work. And protest. There are lots of ways to do this, from zaps to sit-ins to testifying to writing letters. Protest. All right? Thinking about this broadly, this is really important, particularly now. And I want to really kind of spotlight a lot of what we're seeing with this anti-trans legislation. And that's where we need to put a lot of focus and a lot of work. If you do not know Chase Strangio, who's the Deputy Director for Transgender Justice for the ACLU's LGBT and HIV project, find him on Instagram, follow him on your social media of choice, because he is amazing. He is absolutely amazing, right? We need to create a counter narrative and support candidates that support trans people. And this is all up and down the ballot, right? And they exist, right? Sarah McBride. Now, I went to school in Delaware. I was born in Delaware. It's kind of my second home, right? Sarah McBride is the first openly transgender state senator in the country, making her the highest ranking transgender elected official in United States history. She is amazing. She's largely credited with the passage of legislation in Delaware banning discrimination on the basis of gender identity in employment, housing, insurance, and public accommodations. And we know that these are not protections ensured to us in every state, right? So Her quote, "I once worried that there was no place for trans people like me to participate in any way in our politics. Since coming out, though, I've seen that change is possible, and I've learned that the only things that are truly impossible are the things we don't try. You can run, you can win, and you can serve." So this is the part, this is the 3-minute activism, because a lot of what I do is that sort of 3-minute activism. It takes like 3 minutes to make a phone call to your legislator and leave a message. It takes about 3 to 5 minutes to write a postcard, which you have in front of you, plus a handout. So some recent ones, right? Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, safeguarding transgender people's right to access gender-affirming healthcare. This is the big thing we're seeing in a lot of state legislatures right now. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, if you don't know her, she is an ally and filibustered for 3 weeks, even on the bills that she was in favor of, to shut down legislation in Nebraska because there was legislation coming through that would limit transgender youth's access to gender-affirming healthcare. Here's her quote: "If we're going to save the lives of trans kids, it's worth it, 100%. It's worth it." She alone ground government to a halt in her city, in her state. Maura Healey, who is our current governor, is also a history maker, not just for her work and her open visibility, but she has also been at the forefront of a lot of really innovative and important gun safety legislation. She is a champion in many, many ways. All right, you can see stats here, but this is her address. Here's your locals, right? If you want to get hyper-local, you can write a postcard to people who actually are the legislators for this address, right? Paul Mark is a Democrat who covers Berkshire, Hampden, Franklin, and Hampshire. He's kind of amazing. He's pretty cool. I've gotten to meet him. I've worked with him. He supports Emerge, which is a national program that trains people to run for office. He's incredible. Smitty Pignatelli is also a Democrat, 3rd Berkshire. There's their addresses, also on the handout. And then Jack Patrick Lewis. And this kind of ties back to like dinosaurs. Because not only is Jack Patrick Lewis an out legislator in Massachusetts, he's the 7th Middlesex. And so this is actually in our current Massachusetts legislature, an act relative to LGBTQ plus youth inclusive curriculum, right? So he's from Framingham. And look what they're trying to do, what they're trying to change to make law in Massachusetts. They're actually changing the general laws to include the standards shall include sufficient instruction on the histories, roles, and contributions of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people in the history of this country and this Commonwealth. This is amazing, right? So as we're thinking about these things and we're hearing about all this bad news and these bad bills and this other stuff that's coming through, there are actually things that you can do. You can get in touch with legislatures. You can send them postcards. You can call them. You can send them postcards because you have a postcard and you have their addresses and you've got a pen and we've got a little time to do some question and answer as we finish up here. So feel free to get started on those. I will not be offended if you start writing while I am still talking. I teach a lot of drawing classes and I see a lot of heads like this. So go for it. You at home, go for it. If you are here in the audience, write them and we're going to collect them on the way out and cover the cost of postage, which is kind of awesome. How do I do this? What do I write? Postcards are great because you don't have a lot of real estate. There's not a lot of room. You got to be short, right? Legislators don't have a ton of time. Usually mail is read and summarized by other folks. Staffers, but that doesn't mean they don't see it, especially if it's notable or unique or compelling. You're rockers, you know how to stand out from the crowd. This is your great opportunity. Polite and to the point. Use the correct title for the legislator. Introduce yourself, the issue, and your position on it. You can thank them for something, or you can ask them to do something. And I've mostly focused on like positive ones, because I kind of really want to do that pride and joy that we were talking about, but there is a lot of merit in also just sending Ron DeSantis a postcard that just says gay in really big letters. Fully support that. And you can ask for a reply. Sometimes folks actually have a budget. They can mail you mail back. They can mail you a reply. But if you do that, make sure you put your address on it because otherwise they won't know where to send it. This is one I wrote very recently. And you don't have to, it doesn't have to be perfect. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good here, right? You can thank them. Like, as an educator in Massachusetts who works with youth, it's important for me to know that legislators are working to protect trans youth access to gender-affirming healthcare. Thank you for your filibuster, for your voice and your advocacy. We need more legislators like you in this country, all right? So, to wrap up, to sum up, it feels like there's a lot going on, and there is, but we need to fight it, right? And it is not a foregone conclusion. For example, while these new laws may be a painful reminder of what existing while LGBTQ+ in this country has been like, there's power in knowing how they can be fought, and they can be fought, and they can be repealed, right? They have been repealed before. That reminds us that no matter what kinds of legislation are being passed today and how cruel or devastating the impact is, these aren't foregone conclusions. It is on us to change this. It is on us to speak up in our communities and beyond to recognize and to change. And this is my ask to you. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Anne. This is really, really amazing. Another hand for Anne Thalheimer. Okay. So I know that we are multitasking because you're writing your postcards. I certainly wouldn't want to, if Anne gives me an assignment, I definitely do it.
I appreciate that.
But we can also get started on Q&A. We've got some time here to do these questions live. I imagine when that's done, if for those in the audience here, we might be able to do a few more after that, sure. But we definitely have got until certainly 15 minutes or so. We'll also be taking some questions from our viewers online as well. So who would like to ask Anne a question? Yes, Emma. And I'm going to repeat the questions so they're audible for Zoom.
For people who have sort of political leaning interests or interested in running for office in some way, are young, what is a good way to start?
So the question is, if you have political interests, maybe interested in running for office, you're young, you're new at this, what are good ways to start?
Awesome. Yeah, that is a super good question. Interning, getting connected to somebody who's local, who you like, and learning from them. Running for office and getting involved in stuff is not, and I think it's designed this way, is like, it's not a super user-friendly process. You kind of have to have someone bring you through it. Finding someone local who you connect to, spending some time with them, working on their campaign, volunteering, and finding out what you like doing. Because not everybody loves door knocking. Like when I run for, I love door knocking, and everybody else is like, I'll write postcards for you. I don't want to knock on any doors, because you never know what's on the other side of that door, right? But finding what you want, what you're interested in doing, if that's like social media work, or if it's updating, or it's working in a department, or helping send letters, or helping out at an event, get connected to someone who's local to you and springboard from there. Awesome. That is a super good question. Thank you.
Hey, thanks. Other questions? Yes, sounds like we have an online question.
Yes. So we actually have, they're not really questions, they're just statements. I'm going to start with Samantha, and I apologize if I butcher the name. Vaide, V-A-I-D-E. She says, they say not a question, but I want to echo the importance of running for office. I'm in my 5th year of being elected to my local community college board. It has given me a platform to fight for equity. But if you don't want to run for office, learn how to do a ballot initiative.
Yeah.
You can make big changes by writing ballot initiatives and getting signatures. Our first statement. Second is Amanda R., directly to you, Anne. Anne, where is your dinosaur costume? But really and truly, tell me about what we can do in Tennessee as performative protests. The role of civil disobedience. And you are a effing rock star, sister.
I appreciate that. I did work very hard not to swear. There were a couple of moments when I was drafting this and I was like, well, can't say that. So, I love performative protest. But this harkens back a little bit. So when I was a student here, You probably know this. We had a shooting on campus, and I talk about this all the time. This is very, very prominent in who I am. And one of the things, like my memory from that time is messy because trauma, but one of the things I distinctly remember is that a bunch of us got on a bus and went to the State House. And like, there was a lot of testifying going on and whatever, and for some reason or other, we were being shut out. And I don't remember doing this, but people have told me about this after the fact. I basically was like, F this, and charged on in. And everybody kind of came in and we started speaking up. And it was this kind of moment of like, I appreciate being a voter, but this is so much more relevant to me now, right? Like I did cast my first ballot for president when I was at Simon's Rock because I turned 18 while I was here, and they sent the little ballot in the mail with the stylus, which was this paper clip you had to bend and poke the thing out and mail it back. But that felt really important. But that kind of performative protest, and this might also be good and terrible all at the same time, like sit-ins or thinking about different ways to disrupt in creative, amazing ways, right? Whatever your issue is, testifying before legislators, going in for meetings with legislators, dressing up in costumes. One of my favorite protests, and this was like there's some problematic things to it, because if you know The Handmaid's Tale, you know that they have those particular outfits in The Handmaid's Tale, right? With the robes and the hats and all of this. And so we staged a protest at one of our local polling places in Holyoke, because we still have a number of city councilors who are pretty sexist, and like they talk down to women and it's terrible. And so we made these signs that say, don't elect sexists. And we stood there in, good distance from the polling place, but they had to drive past us holding these signs and not saying anything. And people were like, who's the sexist? And we were like, this is performative art, y'all. And thinking of those kind of creative ways to do it, like be creative, be innovative, but also make your voice heard, right? If that's a sit-in, if that's, going to a legislator's event. Earlier I mentioned the ZAP, right? So this was like, legislators will go to places and they'll give speeches and this kind of thing, and then you can stand up and ask a question and like, okay, it's really great that you're introducing this new housing bill, but what about the part where your company displaced these humans? What are you going to do about that? And then they're on the spot and they have to answer. And that makes them uncomfortable, and that's kind of the point, right? Thinking about all those interesting creative ways to get involved, because often bad government works because people stay silent. But Mandy, I'll email you some other ideas.
Great, thank you. Other questions?
How are the postcards coming?
Quick question for you on just your opinion of unions and strikes. Do you think that that might be an effective way to express annoyance at the government for trying to pass trans laws and strikes laws?
Yeah, so the question is, what is her opinion on unions and strikes as a method to kind of protest if the government is passing anti-trans laws or other like negative legislation?
As a union member, I am super pro-union. I am very much in favor of shutdowns. And I really think that kind of protest is amazing. If you look at what's going on in France right now, if you look at what's going on in Germany right now, and even creative protests, like for a while there was a protest in Japan, and it was to do with the bus drivers and the like service workers on the buses. And what they did, instead of like refusing to go to work, they refused to charge people. And they just drove the buses so people could still get to work and still what they were doing, but they didn't make anybody pay. And they fixed that real quick. So when you shut things down, like the Nebraska legislature, people come around real quick. It's going to be uncomfortable for a little while because nobody likes not being able to get stuff that they're used to, but that's what makes it effective.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
Can you go back to the slide with Senator Kavanaugh?
Oh yeah, for sure. Here we go. It should also be on the handout. So on one side of the handout is like how to write to your elected officials from the ACLU. And if you flip it over, all of this stuff is on the back, because my hope is that you'll not just write one postcard, but you'll take the handout with you and write some more later.
And we'd be happy to provide more postcards for that purpose. Yes. Yeah.
I was going to ask, first of all, thank you for the talk. It was absolutely spectacular. Second, if we're not local to New England, can we write to our legislators who are not in New England?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I wanted to sort of provide these as examples. Oh, I'm sorry, you need to repeat the question.
The question was, if you don't live locally in New England, can you write to your legislators more in your home areas?
Absolutely. You can often find, Massachusetts has this, I'm not sure every state has it, but you can usually like Google, once you have internet again, you can Google, find my legislator, and it'll tell you who all of your elected officials are, usually from like the hyper local all the way up to like your federal legislators. So absolutely. And don't be afraid to write to the people who are not allies, right? Again, a lot of that kind of pivots on people assuming like, oh, well, nobody's complaining, so this must be fine.
Thanks. Yes. Oh, yeah, over there, and then I'll do the question on Zoom. Yes.
So going back to shutting things down, when you do that, obviously sometimes people still need things like food and stuff like that. Do you have any advice on setting up like mutual aid programs or like trade networks without using like things like, I mean, like, how do you find that on the internet?
Okay. So the question is, when you do a shutdown type protest, like people still have certain needs. So what are some of the kind of ways to provide mutual aid and so forth?
Mm-hmm. So this is, I think, one of the silver linings of the pandemic. When everything started to shut down in the pandemic and all the supply chains and things broke down, a lot of mutual aid organizations kind of organically popped up, and those structures are still in place. So if you're planning something like this, like a union, like a boycott or a stoppage or some kind of other thing, get together with other folks and really plan it out before you do it. Think about those, not just those things, but how to do it ethically, right? Like what specifically do you want to disrupt? Do you want to shut everything down? That's going to cause lots of problems and lots of issues. Are you prepared for those after effects? Or do you want to stop one particular thing that's going to make people super uncomfortable, but is still going to permit people to generally go about their lives? Think about what your effect is going to be. So searching for a lot of those different things on the internet, start by looking for like mutual aid organizations, but also think about connecting with organizations that are already doing some of that work. Because again, we're talking about communities. A lot of these things work because people are working together. And it's not just one organization, it's many organizations like supporting mutual aid and getting people to and from places and thinking about how you're going to shut stuff down, and also providing some real material support. Because sometimes when we do these big union blocks and things, people get arrested. And you have to be aware of that ahead of time. And getting arrested, not everybody can get arrested. Not everybody is ready to get arrested. Not everybody wants to get arrested. Maybe getting arrested or having a protest that's going to result in arrests is not your goal. Maybe you want to do something else. Maybe you want to go sit outside a legislator's office for as long as you can, right? Thinking about all these different things. I'm thinking about disability rights activists who, in trying to get equal access and equal opportunity, literally like left their wheelchairs and dragged themselves up the steps to legislators' offices. And like the way that image, those powerful images of these folks shamed legislators into doing the right thing. Sometimes that's what you want to do.
Thanks. And yeah, some questions from Zoom.
Questions. I'll start with this one. This is from Jennifer Brody. I hope I pronounced her name correctly. She's a professor here. Can you say more about the power of arts activism and how you have made use of it, Anne?
That's a good question. So there are lots of different ways to approach this, right? I think a lot about when you go to a protest and you bring a sign, think about all the clever signs that you see. That's one way to do it. But also, dressing up in costume can actually be super effective. I think a lot about people who got innovative and creative. I do a lot of work with gun sense legislation and trying to get good gun laws passed. Massachusetts is pretty good on this, but it's not without a lot of work. Like, we worked really hard to get the red flag bill passed. That was not a slam dunk. And thinking about ways in which you can incorporate art and activism. Maybe that's making a zine, right? Maybe that's making posters and hanging them up. Maybe that's getting people involved in I like to think about like cooperative arts making. Like, you get together lots of folks and you're having a meeting and you're planning stuff, but also you're making art, right? Organize an art show, organize activism. Think about ways in which you can incorporate easy activism, like sending a postcard is pretty easy activism, into your regular stuff. I also got to hang out with the Snail Mail Club today. We wrote some postcards and that was awesome. That kind of thing. Make your own postcards, print your own postcards, send them to lots of legislators. I'm hoping, like secretly, I'm hoping that like these folks are gonna send you letters back or send you notes back, and then you can communicate with legislators. Part of it is also to like demystify the process, because we think of them as like scary legislators who are doing important things, but like you're doing important things too.
From our Zoom audience.
Yep.
How do you avoid burnout? Keep up hope when progress seems too slow.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, self-care is important, and I mean that in the sense of like not just like the bubble baths and like pretty things, but taking your meds and going to the dentist and brushing your teeth. That kind of self-care is super important, and learning when to say no. No is a complete sentence. Someone's like, "Oh, I need you to speak on this bill." I'm like, "Nope, not going to do that. Don't want to do it." Or like someone on the internet is like, "Oh, I'd really like you to explain your policy point on this." I was like, "I don't know you. I don't know you anything. No, I'm not doing this." Right? So figuring out where your boundaries are and kind of not just enforcing them, but like lovingly holding them up. Because progress is always going to feel slow. But think about it more like a marathon and less like a sprint. Because we're laying the groundwork now. If this means in 5 years, one of you is on an elected board somewhere, you're on your school committee, that's gonna feel like glacial change, but it's gonna make a huge difference. Those kinds of things are super important. Remember the long game. That's how you avoid burnout. But also say no sometimes.
Well, I am really glad that you said yes to this particular invitation. We are kind of at the top of the hour, so I did want to thank Anne one more time for this amazing experience.
Yay, thank you.
And thank you for joining, whether from afar or from near. If you are in the audience here with us and you have questions you didn't get to ask, I'm sure Anne would be okay coming up on stage and doing that for something that you want to say more privately. Thanks so much for joining. Happy Pride Week. There's a huge number of amazing events going on here on the campus community. We'll be back in this space on Saturday for Ian Spencer Bell's performance. And then in our lecture center, an event on Thursday as well with Gwen Bell. And we certainly hope to see you at many things throughout. And ending in the murder mystery party on Sunday. So lots of great events going on. Thanks so much for being here tonight.
Happy Pride.